Up in here is also immortality. Up here is what he calls the most beautiful thing, and this is what makes philosophy so magnificent, Greek philosophy. He says the nature of ultimate reality, when perceived by the subject, by the person, it is an overwhelming experience of beauty. Beauty, therefore, is reality, therefore, is the most beautiful object. Being the most beautiful object, anyone who catches a glimpse of it knows what it is and does everything to try to pursue it and proceeds into that vision. Now, that means there is a method. That's a treatment plan. Hey, that's a treatment. Because the language that is used by Plato is that very language. You must be led step by step by your teacher. Because Socrates' teacher was a woman. Her name was Diotima of Mantinea, Diotima as she's sometimes called. By the way, there is some discussion of whether this is a real person or not, but what's interesting is whether it's real or not, he volunteers the fact that she is his teacher, and he points therefore to a woman being his teacher, which I find very important. And she introduces him through each one of these, therefore, she introduces him to the process of divination, the need for sacrifice to change your life in order to bring about a higher vision, the mysteries, the way up that intellectual process. It's an intellectual aesthetic experience becoming more and more embracive as it proceeds. It goes this way, you see. It starts with just pursuing beautiful bodies, a beautiful body, and creating beautiful speech and loving it. And then it progresses into more and more greater universal. It becomes more universal in scope until in the final step it's a contemplation of the great ocean of beauty. And in contemplation of it, of course, he creates many magnificent, beautiful speeches in the abundance of philosophy. And that prepares for the great vision. That vision, therefore, that then comes and emerges, allows man to see the nature of reality is not any different in its most intrinsic sense with one's own reality. And therefore one finds that the nature of ultimate reality is not any different than the core of one's own existence, and therefore in that one experiences a oneness between oneself and the nature of ultimate reality. That oneness, of course, is the goal, because that's what ultimately benefits man. That vision of knowing that there's no difference between ultimate reality, which is beautiful, and oneself. One other thing now. He adds one more thing, and he says, the thing that is most beautiful is wisdom. And wisdom is that perception of ultimate reality. Therefore, the ideal that the philosopher must have is wisdom. That's the ideal. As pure beauty as the nature of ultimate reality. The philosopher, therefore, must have this knowledge of how to tell whether or not his subject can take such a ride, can endure such a trip, and whether they're capable of doing it, because that's one of the basic questions in the symposium. Therefore, there has to be a diagnosis, a plan, approach. There has to be a very careful following up to make sure each step is vindicated, followed. It has to be entered into voluntarily. The person must believe that it's going to benefit him, and he has to take the risk. Now, there's an interesting consequence to this, you see. And this is, of course, everything I've said here, by the way, is in the second paragraph. This whole model I've constructed here comes out of the second paragraph of Socrates' speech in the Symposium. He adds one more thing, which I find very interesting. He says, this person, therefore, who's mastered this, has mastered these arts on two levels, both awake and asleep, master of dreams as well as the waking world. Therefore, it can function on both levels, both awake and asleep, to bring about those kinds of diagnoses and treatment plans and follow-up for the whole of man so that man can be benefited. In Plato, what does he do when he reaches that point? He returns back to society to help others reach the same vision. He's obliged to return back, and that's the allegory of the cave, that after seeing the nature of reality, he voluntarily returns back to the cave and becomes back among those who are still there, stuck in their ignorance, and tries to assist others in the same vision which he himself has gained. That's the goal. Therefore, it returns back to benefit not only himself, but society by participating in this. Now, let's see what we can do. Now, we've talked about Proclus, and I just want to bring in Proclus for a few minutes. Proclus looks at this, and he, of course, accepts all of this. Proclus is the 5th century Platonist who looks back on all of the Platonic tradition, and he brings it together in a magnificent form. And he looks at the same model that we've outlined, and he says the basic element that takes place that makes this successful is that the sacrifice and the dedication puts to rest the inferior powers and the conflicts involved in it. Settles for the vision. Remember our model we had here before? Yeah. He said, what does this allow? This allows the philosopher who goes through this, now his inferior power is at rest, he can now turn towards the contemplation of the very nature of reality. But to see the nature of oneself and reality in one vision is to turn about and see into the nature of oneself. This turning about and seeing into one's nature is this word, essence. That's what the word really means, right? In Greek, it's ousia. Therefore, the sight of one's own essence is the sight into one's own nature, a reflective turning about to seeing into your own nature and recognizing there is a vast power there that is a part and parcel of oneself. For Proclus, he says the thing that is most important in this stage, he has 5 stages, this is the 3rd, is that through this process man makes a great rediscovery. And he says every man must make it. And it must be a rediscovery. We must discover once again, rediscovery, that we are part of a rational, intelligible world. Then we can cooperate with the world and we can be intelligible as part of an intelligible reality and bring about the betterment of ourselves and mankind. By doing that, he brings it together by saying, we must reclaim, claim once again, we must reclaim that from which we departed, yet in which we still reside. For in this Platonic vision, of course, coming into existence, becoming encased in a body, that descent, that's a descent into the body, of the soul into the body, right, is a return. It must be a return. It's a return. We went into the body, and that allows us, watch now, it allows us to do something which is very important. We need the arts. We need all the arts. Because when we're in the body, we have to navigate. We have to look for our own benefit. We have to now control ourselves. We have to chart our voyage. We have to become captains of our own soul. We have to gain all of these arts.